voice. It's there for all to hear. It may not be a usual one, not always very clear. Some days it's hardly there at all, but frustrating as it may, I have to persevere, you see, as I have something to say. It's gone, the box, the vocal cords, they took it all away. But can you shut me up? Well, no, as I have something to say. One thing is that I'm still here, with opinions, you can be sure, equally as important as they ever were before. They may not come across the same, intonation's not always good, but I ask for you to listen, please, in a way I can be understood. So here's the thing, I know I look and sound a different way, but I am still me. Be patient, please, as I'll always have something to say. And if I'm in mid-sentence and I stop, it's not by choice. So I'll ask you again, in a different way. Can you hear my voice? Trees of green, where roses too, I see and blue, for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue, sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Royal Opera House and to this insight supported by Rolex. I'm Hannah Conway, Artistic Director of Sound Voice and composer of the Sound Voice Project. Opening today in the Limbury Theatre, the Sound Voice Project is an immersive opera, digital opera, exploring voice loss and identity. And you've just heard the incredible Shout at Cancer, a choir dedicated to supporting people after laryngectomy. The choir is led, directed by maestro here, ear, nose and throat specialist, Dr. Thomas Moores, who joins me now to tell us a little bit more about the choir. So Thomas, thank you so much, all of you, and particularly to Sarah Bowden-Evans, who read her own poem to you at the start of this evening. So thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing that with us. Thomas, tell us about this wonderful choir and your work.
Well, I'm honored to introduce you to my dear friends, the Shout at Cancer Choir. All members have had a laryngectomy, which is the removal of the voice box, mostly indicated by throat cancer, but there's other reasons why we sometimes have to take the voice box out to keep this swallow safe. And we've brought them together in a choir. We didn't start with the choir, we first started with introducing singing and acting and beatboxing techniques to help them improve their speech after laryngectomy, because the voice box is gone. They have to relearn to master that new voice that's been given to them. And with singing and breathing techniques, we help them to overcome the speech problems, to work on articulation, to work on projection. But we obviously have to reach out to an audience as well, because it's a scattered group, it's a small group, there's not that many around, there's around 8,000 in the UK, and they're all over the place. And also in the medical world, the science world, it's a group that's overlooked, but also in our society, it's hard for them to reintegrate when you're missing those very important vocal folds. And so a lot of them struggle with social reintegration, with social isolation, up to 30-40%. So with the choir, we try to spread the message of hope, to inspire the laryngectomy community out there, to get them out there, to show them, like, listen, if we can make it to the opera house, you can get and do your groceries.
Could you just very briefly give us a flavour, because we're going to talk about this in more detail in a minute, but could you just give us a flavour of the different vocal pathologies that we encountered on this project? We were working with not only people who had had throat cancer, who had a laryngectomy, we were working with people with Parkinson's, people who had motor neuron disease on this project as a whole. Just very briefly, could you just outline for those three conditions how that affects their voice and their speech in each of those examples?
Yes, so in the Sound Voice project, there's three different groups that are put in the spotlight to give us an insight in how is their life affected. So thanks to workshops, we have explored their story and how the impact is on their voice, not just on themselves, but the family members as well. And motor neuron disease is one of those pathologies that you can see in the installation, beautifully portrayed by Paul. And the voice is affected in very different ways. The articulation slowly goes, the power slowly goes. It's a terrible disease where you slowly see it decline, and you try to hold on to that voice, to yourself. Whilst Parkinson's is a very different way, also a way that a disease that affects the voice, where it becomes very soft and monotonous. Often it's hard to start, and then they quickly catch up and start rattling because they want the words out. So the articulation is affected there as well, but in general, very, very soft voice. And Parkinson's is something that just they describe it as a tree that starts growing around you and slowly just keeps you whenever you want to move and kind of pulls you back a bit. These two, MND and Parkinson's, it's more slowly progressive, whilst a laryngectomy is very different. Often they get diagnosed, they get the news, yeah, this is bad, that needs to come out, and within 2 weeks' time, the voice is out. So it's very abrupt, very new start, like you have to start writing a new chapter. And it's all about that. The writing of the new chapter is very different for motor neuron disease. The pages start turning slower for Parkinson's as well, and then for shout cancer, it's straight away new chapter.
And we're going to hear a whole lot more about this as evening goes on. So one more time, please give it up for Shout at Cancer. Thank you so much, Thomas. So Shout at Cancer is just one element of the Sound Voice project, which combines music, documentary film, and immersive 360-degree sound to tell the stories of those people whose voices have been lost or significantly changed due to serious medical illness. And I'm so honoured here, we've packed the room full of collaborators on this project, to be joined by many people who have been central to this work, which started many, many years ago, to discuss really the question at the heart of this installation, which is, what does it mean to have a voice, and what does it mean when voice is lost? So please help me welcome, from the end here, Tanya Borge, performer, librettist Hazel Gould, sound designer David Shepherd, soprano Gwyneth Anarand, and laryngologist and professor Martin Birchall. Thank you also for being here this evening. In our audience, we have performer Paul Jameson sitting down here to my right. And we also have Richard Cave. Where are you, Richard? Give me a wave. Are you here? No, we don't have Richard. We were going to bring you Richard, but he's not here, so you'll have to come another day to meet Richard, who actually is Paul's speech and language therapist. But if you need to know anything about Richard, we can ask Paul, of course. So today, as many of you may have already seen the installation that's downstairs, how many of you have? Let's see as a show of hands. Great. So for our audience online, that's about half of our audience here in the studio. How many of you have still got to see it then, have got tickets? Yeah, so probably half and half again. Great. So we've got lots of people that have played key parts, but why on earth did this project start? Why make a piece of work about what it means to have a voice? So my father lost his speech as part of a terminal illness many, many years ago. And as a composer dealing with voice every day, thinking about writing for voice, working with singers, I consider myself somewhat of an expert in voice. And then this happened, and I realized I had not got a clue about the intrinsic value of our voices and why it's so important that we sound like we do, and how that connects to people around us, and the judgments we make when people speak or don't speak, and all those challenges around that. And so I wanted to make a piece of work that deeply explored what it meant to have a voice. And I wanted to do that by bringing together experts in voice, experts either because of their lived experience, because they had lived experience of changing voice, of irrevocably changed voices, or of voice loss, speech loss, or expert because of their professionalism, which might be in healthcare, from the technology sector, from the medical profession, from the arts. And so that's why we have a breadth of people that have joined us today. Now, we started this project, as I said, in 2020, and Hazel, my dear friend and collaborator, writer extraordinaire, she and I started running workshops with different groups of these collaborators, which we mixed up. And when we mixed them up, we had conversations, yes, but we got everybody singing and everybody doing creative writing. And when everybody starts singing together, most of those people are not used to singing. So everyone is equally terrified, and those hierarchies drop away, and people start talking to each other like human beings. You know, it doesn't matter if you're like world's leading laryngologist, or patient, or biomedical research scientist, or lab technician. Everyone was on a level. Everyone was on the same level. Hazel, give us a little bit of a window into this process.
Yeah, so Hannah and I are both very experienced workshop leaders, by which I mean we've both been running workshops around music and drama and writing for many, many years. But as I'm sure you'll all relate to, 2020 threw us a huge challenge, which was COVID. And so having started just a taster of this project by meeting some of Shout at Cancer in the room, we then, as you'll remember, went onto Zoom. Now, that was a really interesting challenge, but for this project, and I can't say it for all the projects I was doing during that time, for this project, that gave us something which I think we wouldn't have had otherwise, which is time and space and a different way of relating to one another. And so we did lots of group sessions where we all looked at each other's squares and could really actually listen. If you remember those Zoom days, you can't talk over one another. So we were really listening to one person at a time. learning how to play games, learning how to have fun in those strange times. But also we did something which I don't think time or money ever would have allowed us to do before, which is to really work one-on-one with people. And those of you who've seen the installation, you'll know that we worked one-on-one with both Paul and Tanya, and we had really long and deep conversations, and that was incredibly rich, and lots of other participants as well, which all fed into the work. So based on our workshopping experience, which is really getting a group of people in the room, trying to get consensus, write a song quick and fast, which is all great experience and really fun and interesting, this brought us something new, which was really sitting with people over a long time and finding themes that keep coming up again and again and again.
And one of the first healthcare professionals that I met on this journey was before lockdown, and I walked into Martin's office. Martin was introduced to me by Thomas, and I walked into Martin's office, and on his desk there was this huge jar full of kind of liquid with this very weird thing inside this huge jar. And Martin quickly said, yes, that's a lion's larynx, which was incredible to see. And I said to Martin, this is who I am, I'm a composer, and he kind of looked at me like, what are you doing in my office, you're not a patient. And I said to him, I want to write an opera with people who've lost their voice. And Martin said, what was your reaction to me?
Yeah, it was just extraordinary because it was so out of what I would normally experience. And I thought you were crazy.
Absolutely bonkers.
Yeah.
But what was wonderful is that, and he said at that time, and Thomas, you'll remember, he said, you are, I've no idea what you're talking about. You're totally crazy. I don't work with artists. I don't work with composers. But yeah, I'm absolutely in. and not only did Martin say he was in, but his whole research team at that time at University College London, you were working on a very multi-million-pound research project called Robovox, which was to do what?
It was basically to try and see if we could bring the best of modern technology together to create a robotic larynx, so a synthetic laryngeal replacement that would do everything that the removed larynx used to do.
And your researchers were thrown into a creative process, as for you. I mean, what was that? That was like going to Mars, wasn't it? Yeah,
it was unnerving. I didn't have to drag them kicking and screaming, but they were kind of thinking, well, can't I go back to my lab? I said, no, you're going to do this.
And what did it change about because we really changed the direction of your research project, didn't we? And I know your personal, professional practice has been changed as a result of your experience being on this project. Maybe you could just say a few words about that.
No, that's absolutely the case. So we're encouraged to engage with patients or people with learned experience and the public when we're doing research projects. But a lot of it is it's kind of, we're just doing it so that we can fill in the boxes. And even if you get people together in a room in a conventional manner with somebody facilitating, there is reticence. People don't really say what they feel. There's dominance. There'll be one person saying what they think. And you can't really get everybody engaged properly. So we often fall back onto what we think as medical professionals is best for somebody without a larynx. And that's not necessarily the case. Here, your methods mean that you get to what people really think, really want, and how they want the world to feel about them and their lives.
And it was the first time that many of your research team had actually heard from people with that lived experience, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, they could come to my clinic and see somebody who's had a laryngectomy, but that's like 10 minutes and very objective. It's not really understanding what it is like to lose your voice.
So, Hazel, because we had half and half audience have seen the installation.
Yeah.
For those who haven't, just to contextualise it briefly without any spoilers, could you just tell us, it's in 3 chapters, the installation, just very briefly give us a kind of one-line synopsis for each chapter.
Yeah. So we made 3 pieces which appear in this installation, although there is a suite of pieces which exist that we made with other groups. The first one that you have seen or will see is called Paul, and we wrote that for and with Paul, and we called it a dual aria. That was the best way we could describe it. It's 2 voices singing 1 character. So it was important to us that there were 2 ways to voice the same character. The second one is called I Left My Voice Behind, and that we wrote a lot of the text over Zoom with the Shout at Cancer Choir, many faces I've only ever seen in a box before today. That was about what it's like to lose a voice and build a new one, and that new chapter that Thomas was talking about. And the third one is called Tanya, and that was made for and very much alongside Tanya, which is about the experience of motherhood and losing your voice and what that means and how you move forward with your children.
And we met you, Tanya, because you were part of Shout at Cancer. You came into this process with the choir, and then as you were talking about your own personal experiences, Hazel and I felt just such a kinship in terms of like motherhood and just, you know, being young women. We were just drawn to you and your story particularly in that, you know, you had 1 week between diagnosis and surgery. Unbelievably shocking, we can't even imagine. But just for the audience, just to kind of bring it right down on a day-to-day level, what's it like as a woman, as a mother? What are the challenges with a laryngeal voice?
I mean, if you're a parent and you've got young children, you know that they're challenging at the best of times. But the way that I speak now is obviously very different to before, and there are days when my voice just isn't working very well. I can't get much volume, or I'm tired and I'm feeling under the weather, and things like sitting down in a very quiet studio with a microphone on. You can probably all hear me perfectly clearly. I do have good articulation and I do have a good output, but when I'm walking the kids to school and they're racing off on their scooters and I don't want them to cross the road without me, or I'm in a pub, I like to socialise, I like to go out and see friends, I like to have a meal, and things like being in a loud, busy environment I find really challenging. So it's difficult to join in a group conversation. It's much easier for me to have one-on-one, and I have to make sure that the person's locked in, and if it's really loud, they're trying to lip read, or I'm kind of trying to act things out. If I'm eating, I can't speak when I'm swallowing food, so I have to wait. So sometimes a conversation is happening around me, and then by the time I'm able to speak and I want to interject, the conversation's moved on. Or, you know, being in a supermarket and pushing a shopping trolley when you've got kids with you.
Or just using one hand, because we can see you're needing one hand to press a speech valve to speak. So holding children's hand crossing the road, two of them at the same time, and speaking to them.
This morning, I was on my way to the train station and my partner called me, and I had to hang up and send a very quick message to say, can't talk, because if I do, it means I'm going to have to stop, and I need both hands to. So, it's just, I mean, you adjust and you adapt, but there are limitations.
So these totally simple things that we never think about, right? In contrast, with some similarities with what Tanya's just said in terms of actually wanting to interject, wanting to join a conversation, Paul, when we met you, way back in 2020, you still had some speech, a little bit of your speech, and now, sadly, it's totally gone. But you are totally going to participate tonight because Paul comes with his digital voice. And maybe you could just explain tonight, tell us about this voice that you're using.
Good evening, Hannah. Yes, this is my voice, which has recently been recreated by taking my voice from a video I did in 2017. My thanks to Richard Cave, the MND speech and language therapist at the MND Association, for this. Richard is in the audience tonight. My recreated voice is a good likeness, but I promise it was not this dull and monotone. Some will probably disagree.
Paul, could you explain in a few words, what has the Sound Voice Project meant to you?
When you lose your voice, it takes away more than just your ability to communicate. You also lose part of your identity, personality, and persona. It was therefore a wonderful and cathartic experience when I was given the opportunity to work with Hannah and Hazel at Sound Voice to explore what voice meant to me and how music may help bring back a way to communicate the emotion and feelings that I had lost.
And just going back to November 2020, we'd spent many months with you before that, writing this piece, going backwards and forwards with text and having really spoken for hours and hours and hours. And in the end, we wrote this love song for your wife, lovely Jess, who's with you. And you turned up at the Coliseum, first time on a stage, not a bad stage to start, with not only Roderick Williams, baritone, world-acclaimed singer, meeting him for the first time, standing on that stage, singing your aria with Roddy, to Jess, who was in the audience, listening to this incredible, beautiful love song, and Roddy was in part your voice. What was that like?
After many hours of workshops, Paul's aria was created, a beautiful piece composed by Hannah, where Roddy Williams voiced the words of a love song to my wife Jess. It is one of the most emotionally charged things I've ever done. I got totally wrapped up in it and felt a genuine connection with Roddy when we sang together. It's helped me regain my identity. We all know how music touches the soul, and this is how it felt. I almost felt I could speak again.
And I remember that, I'll never forget that day for the whole of my life. It was a wonderful, wonderful day, and I just thank you so much for trusting us with your story and working with us to write this piece. It's been such a joy from start to finish, literally. So on my left, Gwen's listening to all this. Gwen is a dear friend and colleague. We met many moons ago, doing some other work for some other opera company, who shall not be named.
Nope.
And I asked you to come in to sing the first piece that I set for this project, which actually is the poem that you heard tonight. I asked Sarah, I heard her recite that poem at the Belgian embassy many, many years before, and I'd always remembered it, which is why I kind of had come back to Thomas and the choir for this project. And I set the poem and then thought, that's one for Gwen, and came to you and said, I've got this project, and then you said, oh my goodness, this has a resonance for me.
Oh, I'm supposed to talk now.
Tell us the story. Tell us why.
It was a few days before lockdown, or the theatre lockdown. I was in rehearsals, Hannah rang, and she explained the project. And my heart just froze. In 2015, I was diagnosed with a tumour around my cords, and it went to many places. I was really, really fortunate and had an amazing consultant, and he said, oh, it's going to be impossible. Where his eyes just lit up. It was quite ridiculous. But so it really resonated for me, because there was a possibility that I would not be able to sing. And, you know, she finished and I got off the phone. I just had a little cry, because it just seemed as though everything just came together. And I met Sarah, and we spent a day sometime after that recording it. And it just meant so much, to the point that I'm an associate artist at the Wigmore Hall, and I decided that it needed to be heard on a larger scale, so I programmed it in one of my recitals that was streamed worldwide, and Sarah made her Wigmore debut, and she got to perform. So we separated the song and we put her in the middle of it so she could actually recite the poem. And all the information was given about the project, and basically, if Hannah calls, I will answer.
That's good to know. So, thinking about this, you know, this is a digital work, and lots of people come to the Opera House in absolute shock. What? No live performers? How can this be possible? Why is, you know, what's the worth of a piece with no live singers? this is where David comes in. So David is a sound, I mean, I call you really a sound wizard, should be your title rather than sound designer. The reason this piece sounds so incredible in the space downstairs is David's expertise. And you're dealing with acoustic instruments that we want to sound as though they're in the room, as in the space. You're dealing with spatialized audio in that room downstairs in the theatre. How do you go about making it sound as live?
Well, it's all about the music. So my job, I'm a very privileged person. I get to work with wonderful musicians, wonderful composers and artists. And what I'm there to do is to allow that music to work for the audience. And it's really important that you are not distracted by loudspeakers, that you're not worrying about the fact that the sound is coming out of boxes. You want to feel like you are listening to a performance. So one of the reasons we looked at doing an immersive surround version of this piece is spatial audio allows us to actually place sound much more in space rather than in a speaker. So by having that opportunity to use multiple speakers to focus sound, I'm able to actually think of the instruments as real instruments, that they have room for the air to move rather than just a loudspeaker forcing that sound at you. So by actually working in this way, we were able to really focus on very high quality recordings of the instruments, but we were able to really start to play with the exact positioning that an instrument inhabits. So I think without spatial audio, it wouldn't be so successful, because when you're just playing music through a stereo system, it's very hard to get away from the fact it's coming out of those speakers. But hopefully, people who've experienced the installation, you start to forget about that. And particularly, you're able to focus on the stories and the voices, because it's all about the voices.
And we worked with the wonderful video designer Luke Halls on this. There are pros and cons with projected images and spatialized audio, right? Because as soon as you see an image, you're expecting the sound, to come from, a projection of Roddy on screen. You want to believe that that's Roddy singing. So talk a little bit about the challenges around that.
Yeah, so I do a lot of work with spatial audio, and one of the biggest challenges is the idea that we respond very quickly to image. So if we see something and we hear a sound that we believe comes from that thing we're looking at, even if the sound isn't in that position, we still believe it's coming from there. And that distracts from what the spatial audio is trying to do. It's all about narrative with spatial audio. You're adding a layer to the communication, to the emotional context of what you're listening to. So the minute you put a screen with an image, that has an impact on what you're hearing and how you listen. So if we've done this piece a few times with the screen at one end, and you're sat much more traditionally like you are now, watching the screen. The challenge then is if we're forced to put all the sound around the image, it just loses the impact and it becomes a film with a soundtrack. This piece is all about a performance. It's about experiencing the emotional performance of the music. So I think it was a very good decision early on, was to work with screens in the middle and focus. The images on screen are all about the voices. So we're able to place the voices very local to those screens, and then the rest of it we can play with space, but you as the listener and the audience can truly focus on the words and the story.
I want to focus a little bit before I start throwing this open to questions. You will have a chance to be part of this discussion. Hazel, we were dealing with such sensitive stories. We're dealing with trauma. We're dealing with everybody's reality of their everyday. People, you all have trusted us with the stories of your lives that are current and continuous. What are the ethical responsibilities as an artist when you're making work of this kind?
I think it's a really live discussion and an ongoing one, which I'm sure lots of people in the audience will be involved in terms of participatory work, verbatim work, who has the right to tell what stories is a big question, and I'm not sure I have the answer totally, but I know that it's really important to have relationships. I know that it's really important to get consent, but ongoing consent, and make sure that people you're working with understand what they're consenting to. People saying, yes, I'm happy for my image to go out is one thing. I'm happy for my image to go out, you know, in a particular area is another thing altogether. But I think, without wishing to erase I think the reason that we as artists are in the room is because we bring an artistic voice, and then it becomes an artistic collaboration. I think we have to view ourselves as equal creators. But I also think that what I can bring and what we can bring is craft to stories that need to be told. And so I hope that I have, Hannah and I, over the years of working alongside groups to make songs that might last 3 minutes and pieces that last a lot longer and just exist for one workshop or perhaps go on a big stage, we've honed that craft. And so while I have an artistic voice, I think it's an artisanal job, which is that you're trusted with material, and then you look at how you can chisel it into something. And then you have to allow yourself to be wrong. You have to allow people to say, that's not what I want it to be, and listen, I think.
And because we're so lucky in having Paul and Tanya here, I'd just love to hear from each of you in turn, firstly with Tanya. I mean, you've watched this installation with audience. It's your story. You've performed this live on stage with Gwen, but also with Lucy Crowe. What's it like for you experiencing your story told back to you? You're part of that sometimes live, sometimes you're watching that. What do you want audiences to take away? What's it been like? Just briefly.
Gosh, it's strange. It's really strange. Like I've seen the installation before. I went to see it with my husband this afternoon, and being there when you know that there are people in there who are going to clock that, oh, there's the person that's in the installation. So that's kind of strange, because every time I see it or even hear it, and it's the first couple of bars as it plays in, I'm immediately back there. But that piece it means so much to me, I think, because at the time that I met Hazel and Hannah I was about 6 months out of surgery, and I'd become involved with the Shout at Cancer choir and the project that they were doing, and we met, and I'd seen Paul's piece, and I remember it just moving me to tears. It was the most moving thing I'd ever seen, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I would love to do something like that. And you obviously read my mind and said we'd really like to do something with you. And I mean, what you said, Hazel, it was very much a collaboration throughout and through hours of interviews, and I shared so much with you. And if you've seen the installation video of me that I'd shared with you guys, and I never intended, that was never my idea when I made it. It was just a private video that I'd made, and I trusted you both implicitly, and you handled it with such care, and I felt so involved that there were never any surprises. So I'm proud when I see it, but it takes me right back to a very raw time in my life.
And that word pride, I'm so proud of it too, and I'm so proud that literally it sounds super cheesy, but we kind of walked together, holding hands from the start to where we are now, literally. And I hope that really shows in the piece. Paul, lastly, I'd love you to share with audiences what would you like people to take away when they hear your piece?
I would like them to think about their voice, which for the vast majority of people they take for granted. I want them to think how powerful their voice is, not just for communication, but to express emotion and to convey feelings. Of course, technology has been a great friend for me, but it was with the help of music that I was really able to convey emotion and feeling. I will forever be grateful to Hannah and the Sound Voice team for that.
And we're so grateful for you as well in sharing your story with us. Right, it's time to come to you. You're sitting there in silence, and now's your time to speak, audience in our studio. I'm sure that many of you have got questions. Have you got questions? Would you like to join the discussion? We would love to hear from you if you have questions. We can, of course, go on speaking. I've got many questions that I'd like to continue asking, but if there are questions, please just raise your hand. And when I say questions, I'd love to hear your thoughts afterwards, but please keep your questions nice and succinct so we can come to lots of different people should there be some. There's a gentleman that straight away had his hand up, so I'm going to go to you, sir. There's a microphone whisking its way up to you.
Hi, I was lucky enough to see the performance at King's Place a few years ago, and the installation just now. In both cases, once I got over the emotion, I think that the technology involved in the installation is extraordinary. We discussed that tonight. But the one thing that struck me was that I hadn't heard before was the voice of the shout-out choir turned into digital form from people's recordings. How on earth did that happen?
So we were working with a company called Cereproc, based up in Edinburgh. They're a digital speech technology company specializing in making synthetic voices, much of the time for commercial use, like the kind of voices you hear on railway stations announcing platforms. But also they're heavily involved in voice banking for people with motor neuron disease. And we're interested in the idea of making sung voices, because it's one thing to create a spoken voice, but to create a sung voice and then to create a voice that can actually do melodically what a composer might wish. Well, that was something they'd never done before. So I'm going to delegate that one.
I'm not sure exactly the process, but through the latest in digital analysis, they're able to resynthesize from the formants and all the elements that make up our voices. They're able to actually create what the vocal cords would be doing and try and create a singing voice. It was very early stages for them. I don't know where they're at now with it, but you'll have heard there's quite a lot of artifacts and noises that come with those voices. But I mean, it's what I was surprised by was how moving they are. They're not just digital and robotic and simple, pure sound. They have variance, they have breath, they have shape to them. So they clearly have learnt a lot from the spoken voice that they've analysed, and they really put an imprint across it. So it was early days for them, and it was a great experiment for them. And I'm sure we've reached a point now where we all know with AI how you can now make songs by all your favourite artists without them being there. So it would be very different now.
There's someone online that I've just been fed a question in my ear from, because we've got audience joining us around the world as this is being live broadcast. And they've asked about, in sort of response to your question, sir, they've been picked up on the idea of technology and, what technological advances, and I'm going to go to Martin for this, technological advances, and this is, the reason I'm going to you, Martin, as many of you may not know, your research helped pioneer techniques leading to the world's first stem cell-based organ transplant in an adult and in not only one child, but 3 children. Yeah. You corrected me earlier.
Yeah, that's right.
So when we're talking about technological advances that might help different voice pathologies, tell me, what's in the future for us?
Yeah.
Is there anything?
Well, not Nostradamus. I can't even say it. When you go into a betting shop, there's always several paying in booths and only one paying out. So predicting the future is notoriously difficult. What I can say is that technology is advancing at a rate that I've not seen in my lifetime, increasingly old. So I can't tell you exactly how we will replace voice for people with laryngectomy or motor neuron disease in the future. But what I have learned is that we have to personalize it. And so whatever technology does bring, the key to it, because I mean there's lots of different what we call metamaterials, things that would do exciting things. There are soft robots that will move like parts of snakes and octopus, and lots of things that we can use in the future, but it's the control of them that's going to really matter. And I think what we've learned this evening, and I've absolutely learned, and our group has learned from your work, is the importance of individuality and building in emotion and responsiveness to how people are feeling as well. So the control is going to be what really matters. And we spoke about AI earlier. And AI's biggest challenge at the moment is anticipating humans, because we are so random. They have, whether it's a self-driving car or self-driving aeroplane, they cannot predict what a human's going to do next. And we need to get to that point for voice so that it can not only anticipate what we're saying, but how we're saying it and why we're saying it.
Thank you. Any more questions? Lady at the back has got her hand up, and there's a gentleman down in the front row that we'll go to next.
Hello and good evening, and hello Hannah. I'm very happy to be here from Fedora, and we're very proud to support this project also along the journey, and I can't wait to discover it tomorrow. I am curious to know, where do you want this project to go in, let's say, 5 years from now? Because you've done so much tremendous work over the past years, and it's so promising, and it's, as you all said, it's moving so many people's lives and making such a difference. Where would you ideally want this project to be in 5 years from now?
Well, thank you for asking that. I'm going to bring Gwen into this as well, because for me, I quite simply should say that it means so much that the Royal Opera House have invited us to bring this piece here, out of all places in the world, to be celebrating voice in all its colours, in all its magnificence, in all its individuality. What an incredible place to actually do that in, where voice is so often treated, well, critically, right? Like, why is it important for a project like this to be taken outwards to opera houses and? And you perform all over the world in the most exquisite venues.
It should be taken everywhere. That's my humble opinion. I think this goes beyond so many things. It's the humanity of it. It's the joy in the sounds that we make. No matter what those sounds are, it's our way of communicating, no matter how that happens. This project is so significant, and it needs to go everywhere, in my humble opinion. It's really special, and it cannot not touch you. Through the stories, through the emotions, through everybody that's involved, whether it be one of the most leading people in the world, whether it be a humble singer, whether it be the minds behind it. Everybody has come together to create something so, it's vocally monumental. And it's also emotionally monumental. And from a human standpoint, it's everything. And now I'm going to be quiet.
And it's about which voices are given the stage and whose stories are given the stage. And that's, in this day and age, more important than any other time, surely. There's a gentleman here. Do you still have a question? Great. There's a microphone right there.
Thank you. Yes. A few months ago, former rugby league player Rob Burrows, I believe, had motor neuron disease, and he was a big part in publicising motor neuron disease. Do celebrity faces like that have a direct impact on people becoming aware of the reality of this unfortunate condition? And is that would they have a progressive, positive impact on a professional and a personal development of how people react to, so a third person would react to motor neuron disease?
We're looking straight to you, Martin. I know that MND isn't your direct subject specialism, but it sure ain't any of ours. So I'm coming to you.
Yeah, no, we are actually doing some work in MND at the moment.
Great.
But particularly on swallowing, actually, because although the voice is one of the first to go, the swallowing becomes very problematic later on. So, yeah, I'm actually from Wigan myself, so I'm a big rugby league supporter. And actually, he wasn't the first rugby league supporter to unfortunately pass away of motor neuron disease. So, yes, it does have an impact. There's no doubt about it. I mean, one of the biggest examples in my specialty was, I'm going to forget his name straight away, Michael Douglas, who made people aware that throat cancer could be related to human papillomavirus, the HPV. And that then persuaded governments around the world to start immunising boys as well as girls. You know, because girls get immunised already. So it can have a big influence, yes. I think that, you know, Rob Burrow and the way that Rugby League and the BBC, God bless them, presented it, has done a world of good for publicising MND. It does, on a practical level, bring in a lot of money as well. And that is distributed, we think, very fairly. And we do proportionally far more research in this country on MND than anywhere else in the world, head for head.
Thank you for that question. There's a gentleman waving at us on this side. Let's go to you. There's a microphone just being passed up to you, sir.
I'm enjoying all the contributions and wondering, how do I pull this all together? What thoughts might I have about it? I don't think I'm alone in feeling that we're in a very dark place at this moment. When you see the worldwide grief, you know, at people just not treating each other humanely, people starving each other, all that sort of thing. And add to that the natural disasters. I mean, you may know something about Italy this last month. It's just beyond belief what's happening there, and Spain too. When we get these almost unbearable TV reports and radio reports, there's one little thing that moves me. When people are bawling out their grief, something in me says, there's hope for us. As long as we can weep, as long as we can cry out, it's suggesting that there's something, that it needn't all stay like this, that actually it could change. There could be an end to the hatred and the killing and the despair. And the voice has a very important part. Am I right? I don't.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that what's interesting about this piece is that perhaps what you're saying is that when we actually really listen to one another, which is coming back to something that Hazel talked about, what it truly means to listen, to deeply listen, and then to have a dialogue, which is what's happened in this project. And I really hope that the pieces are proof, kind of in the pudding of that. And that then there begins a journey, not just a journey for everybody who's been part of this process, all these incredible collaborators, but the journey is for you as an audience. And many audience members have said that it's a journey which starts when they see this piece and continues for them long after they've left the auditorium. And I have to thank Sarah Crabtree, who artistically led the programming at the Limbury Theatre that invited us to bring this piece, because she heard the piece a year and a half ago and came to me and said, I heard this piece a year and a half ago and I've never forgotten it. She heard just Tanya's piece recording of it, and she said, it stayed with me. And perhaps, that's what you're getting at in terms of voice and what happens when we truly listen and just when something clicks and something happens. Thank you for bringing that up. Are there any more questions tonight? There's a question in the front row and also one here. Do we have time? Let's see. Let's go over here because the microphone's there. Thank you.
It's not exactly a question, but I'm a friend of Spiros, who's in your choir, and he invited me, and I just think it's really amazing what you're doing, because everybody has a voice, whether you're sign languaging or... But one thing about Spiros, he's a very cheeky guy. He called me crazy the other day, so... Yes.
I agree. I've met Spiros for many a time. I totally agree. Spiros is available for conversation after this event. Let's have our final question. This lady in the front row, who's patiently waited. Could we get a microphone to the front? That will be our last question, I'm afraid, tonight.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question for Martin, probably. I was very intrigued as to the fluency of Paul's talking voice. How did you... Is it a secret? Paul did explain that they sampled some of his previous videos, but it seemed very fluent, his answers earlier.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on AI, so I don't know the details of it. But I mean, essentially, the basic principle of AI is that you feed in as large a data set as you possibly can. And so the more speech you can collect, then the more it has to work with. So, that then enables you to program what it's going to say. But as Paul says, I mean, it does transform the ability to communicate. But we do need to work more, as I say, on the nuances. And maybe even have people singing. There's a great device that has been developed in Australia by somebody called Fazana Ramadi. And this basically anticipates sound coming out of the windpipe when laryngectomy is speaking. Because most of what the larynx is, it's a sounding board. It's like the reed in a clarinet, and you can adjust the frequency. But the words are actually formed with the mouth and the lips and the tongue, and they're all still there. Which is why we can hear such excellent speech from our colleagues here. So using this device and programming it with AI, you can actually have your own words coming out of your mouth. So the sort of words that we heard there, but actually coming out of your own mouth as well. It's very imperfect at the moment, but it is getting there.
Thank you so much for all your questions, and also online for our online audience as well. We have just only a few more minutes left. I know. Of this insight tonight, I'm afraid. But you can see the Sound Voice project in the Limbury Theatre until the 20th. That's next Wednesday. So do go to the website for tickets if you haven't already purchased them. But we're going to end this evening, you'll be delighted to hear, with another performance from Shout at Cancer. So thank you very much to all my guests tonight, to Paul, to our panel, obviously to the choir, to those of you sitting in our studio audience, to those of you who are watching from around the world. We really hope you've enjoyed the insight supported by Rolex. And so please welcome again Shout at Cancer back to their feet and back to the stage for a performance of We've Found Our Voice.
Mm-hmm.